Some movies were not doomed by fate, but by ego. But these 15 cinematic disasters collapsed from just one fatal choice: a casting gamble, a production gamble, a studio panic. One decision was all it took to transform dreams into box office nightmares. This is the story of how it all unraveled, one film at a time, one mistake at a time. Number 15. The Adventures of Pluto Nash, 2002. It was supposed to be Eddie Murphy's comeback, a flashy sci-fi comedy set on the moon with big laughs and bigger action. Instead, it became one of the most infamous bombs of the early 2000s. What destroyed The Adventures of Pluto Nash was not the concept itself. It was the single decision to pour blockbuster-level money into a joke that was never funny to begin with. The studio greenlit a budget that ballooned past $100 million, despite early warning signs. The script had been floating around Hollywood since the late 80s. It had already been rejected by numerous actors, but executives saw stars and visual effects and ignored the obvious. They thought Eddie Murphy's name alone could carry anything. He could not. The film's tone was all over the place. It tried to be campy but felt cold. It tried to be clever but landed flat. Sets looked expensive but soulless. The movie sat on a shelf for 2 years before being dumped into theaters with barely any promotion. When it finally opened, it earned a laughable $7 million, not even a tenth of its budget. In the end, audiences did not reject the moon base or the genre mashup. They rejected a studio's blind faith in a broken project. One decision to go big on something hollow doomed it forever. Number 14. Cutthroat Island, 1995. By the mid-90s, pirate movies were considered box office poison. The genre had not worked in decades. But Kuroko Pictures went all in on one last high seas epic, and that one fatal decision, to spend over $100 million on a pirate adventure nobody asked for, destroyed both the film and the studio behind it. Cutthroat Island starred Gina Davis as a swashbuckling heroine and aimed to revive the old Errol Flynn energy. But test audiences were baffled. The tone was inconsistent. The script was constantly rewritten during shooting. The romance fell flat. And worst of all, the decision to cast Matthew Modine in a key action role was met with a shrug. Big stars had passed. The ones left couldn't carry it. Still, the studio refused to pivot. They doubled down. Massive ship sets were built. Explosions were staged. A bombastic score was recorded. But buzz was non-existent. The pirate ship was already sinking before it set sail. When Cutthroat Island finally hit theaters, it barely made $10 million. Kuroko filed for bankruptcy weeks later. Hollywood swore off pirate movies for nearly a decade until Pirates of the Caribbean made the genre cool again. But for Cutthroat Island, the damage had been done. One bold decision, to go big when everyone else said no, turned treasure into wreckage. Number 13. Howard the Duck, 1986. It had George Lucas as producer. It had a cult comic book source. It even had impressive practical effects. But Howard the Duck crashed and burned because of a single catastrophic miscalculation, marketing a bizarre adult-toned concept as a mainstream family film. Audiences did not know what to make of it. Was it a raunchy sci-fi comedy or a kid's film? Was it for comic nerds or Saturday matinee crowds? The confusion stemmed from one studio decision to tone down the script and recut the film for a broader audience. What remained was a Frankenstein product that satisfied no one. Howard's duck suit looked technically impressive but felt creepy. The sexual innuendo clashed with kiddie aesthetics. Jokes fell flat, characters were thin, and the surreal plot about duck world invasions and dark overlords played more like a fever dream than a story. The original comic had wit and edge. The movie had neither. Universal expected a hit and poured millions into promotion. But reviews were brutal. Audiences laughed in the wrong places. Merchandising flopped. It was a public embarrassment for Lucasfilm. Even George Lucas had to sell part of his company to recover. Howard the Duck didn't bomb because the character was unfilmable. It bombed because one fatal choice tried to force a cult oddity into a mainstream box. And the duck never recovered. Number 12. The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1996. Few films imploded as spectacularly as The Island of Dr. Moreau. This supposed sci-fi horror epic had Marlon Brando. it had Val Kilmer, it had H.G. Wells, but the single decision that ruined everything was this: firing the original director just days into filming and unleashing chaos in his place. Richard Stanley had spent years developing the project with a dark vision true to the novel. But studio executives got nervous. After just 3 days of production, they removed him and brought in veteran director John Frankenheimer. That decision detonated the film from the inside. Brando arrived on set, behaving like a walking fever dream. He rewrote scenes without warning. Kilmer refused to follow direction. Actors quit. Rewrites came daily. The new director clashed with everyone, including the actors and producers, and the tone veered wildly between horror satire and unintentional parody. Even worse, Stanley never left the set. Legend says he snuck back in costume as one of the mutant extras, just to watch the carnage unfold. What should have been a brooding sci-fi masterpiece became a stitched-together mess with no clear identity. When it premiered, critics called it incoherent and embarrassing. Audiences stayed away. It made under $50 million worldwide. One act of executive panic doomed the film, and the vision behind it, forever. Number 11, At Long Last Love, 1975. Peter Bogdanovich was riding high. After hits like The Last Picture Show and Paper Moon Studios were throwing money at him. And then came one creative decision that sent everything spiraling, recording all the musical numbers live on set without rehearsal or post-production polish. At Long Last Love was meant to be a lush tribute to Cole Porter musicals. Starring Burt Reynolds and Sybil Shepherd, it aimed for old Hollywood charm. But unlike musicals of the past, which carefully recorded songs in studio and dubbed them later, Bogdanovich insisted everything be sung live. That meant uncontrolled vocals, untrained performers, and constant sound compromises. Reynolds could not sing. Shepherd had no stage musical experience, and the mix of voices and orchestras captured on live mics came out awkward and flat. Critics were stunned by how off-key and uneven it sounded. Even worse, the pacing of scenes was dictated by music that lacked rhythm. The studio stood by Bogdanovich's vision until test screenings bombed. But it was too late to fix anything. When the film released, it was instantly mocked. Bogdanovich's career never fully recovered, and live recording for musicals was shelved for decades. The film was not doomed by genre or ambition. It was doomed by one director's stubborn decision to chase authenticity without considering whether his cast could deliver it. Number 10. The Swarm, 1978. During the disaster movie craze of the 1970s, Irwin Allen was the king. After hits like The Towering Inferno and The Poseidon Adventure, he could sell anything. But then came The Swarm, a killer B-movie that collapsed because of one wild miscalculation, treating an absurd concept with complete deadly seriousness. The Swarm was based on fears about Africanized bees invading the United States, but instead of leaning into camp or satire, Allen made the decision to direct it like a prestige disaster film. The cast was stacked with A-listers. The score was grand and dramatic. The special effects were elaborate, but the premise never supported such a heavy tone. Audiences could not take it seriously. They laughed at death scenes. Critics panned the dialogue as robotic. The science was nonsense. The pacing dragged. Despite the star power and budget, the film became a punchline. Even within the genre, it stood out for all the wrong reasons. While Jaws balanced tension and absurdity, The Swarm doubled down on melodrama. Had it embraced its own ridiculousness, it might have become a cult classic. Instead, it became a bloated joke. All because one producer-director refused to acknowledge the silliness at the film's core. The result? A box office stinger no one saw coming. Number 9. One from the Heart, 1982. Francis Ford Coppola had conquered the 70s. The Godfather. Apocalypse Now. He had reshaped American cinema. So when he envisioned a stylized romantic musical set in Las Vegas, studios gave him full control. The fatal decision? Abandoning real locations entirely and building a synthetic dream world on a massive custom soundstage, no matter the cost. One from the Heart was meant to feel like a living postcard. Coppola created an entirely artificial Las Vegas, complete with neon-lit streets, artificial skies, and massive soundstage recreations of restaurants, hotels, and city blocks. It was a surrealist gamble that placed style above substance. But building this dreamscape didn't just strain the budget, it annihilated it. Production ballooned to over $26 million, unheard of for a romantic drama with no stars. Meanwhile, the story itself was intimate and simple. Audiences struggled to connect the small tale of heartbreak and reconciliation with the overwhelming artifice on screen. What should have been charming felt cold and distant. Critics were split. Some admired the experiment, others called it indulgent and hollow. When it premiered, it made barely $1 million and sent Coppola's Zoetrope Studios into bankruptcy. His reputation survived, but the financial fallout haunted him for years. Had it been filmed on real streets with modest ambition, One from the Heart might have found its audience, but Coppola's one fatal decision, to build a dream from scratch, turned it into a costly cinematic mirage that vanished on impact. Number 8. S.G.T. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 1978. The Beatles never signed off on it. There was no original dialogue. The story was stitched together from song lyrics. But none of that stopped producers from making one of the strangest jukebox musicals in history. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band bombed for one simple reason: the decision to build an entire film around a gimmick, rather than a coherent story. Starring the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton, the film imagined a surreal narrative told entirely through Beatles songs. There was almost no spoken dialogue. Characters sang their feelings using hits like Come Together and Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. But the plot, involving a magical musical instrument and a battle against evil record executives, was incoherent and tonally bizarre. The film leaned heavily on spectacle and style. Costumes were outrageous, sets were saturated in neon and glitter, but without a strong emotional core, it all felt empty. The Bee Gees looked uncomfortable. Frampton was miscast. Cameos by Steve Martin and Aerosmith added confusion, not clarity. Test audiences were baffled, critics destroyed it, and Beatles fans were outraged by how the music was treated. The film cost over $12 million and flopped hard, earning less than half that at the box office. The gimmick had potential in smaller doses, but producers chose to go all in, betting everything on a fantasy concept no one had fully thought through. One decision, to substitute story for spectacle, made this a psychedelic implosion few have dared to imitate since. Number 7. The Bonfire of the Vanities, 1990. Tom Wolfe's novel was a biting social satire about greed, race, and the media circus of 1980s New York. It was sharp, cynical, and brutally funny, but when Hollywood adapted it for the big screen, they made one fatal misstep. They tried to turn it into a light mainstream comedy. That one choice destroyed the film from the inside out. Director Brian De Palma had the visual chops. The cast, Tom Hanks, Bruce Willis, Melanie Griffith, had star power, but none of them fit the material. Hanks was cast against type as a morally bankrupt Wall Street trader. The book's acid tone was watered down to make him sympathetic. The sharp social commentary became broad gags. The dark racial politics of the novel were softened. What remained was an echo of the original story. Even the marketing betrayed the film's identity. Trailers pitched it as a stylish farce. Audiences expecting laughs were greeted with muddled satire. Those seeking depth found Hollywood polish instead. Test screenings were dismal. Critics called it a catastrophe. The budget ballooned past $40 million. It barely made $15. Ironically, the behind-the-scenes disaster became more famous than the movie itself. The book, The Devil's Candy, chronicled every bad choice in painful detail. But at the heart of it all was one core failure: trying to turn a vicious social critique into a feel-good romp. Bonfire of the Vanities didn't fail because it was too risky. It failed because it wasn't risky enough. One studio's decision to play it safe ended in cinematic fire. Number 6. Paint Your Wagon, 1969. A Western musical sounds strange today. In 1969 it sounded like madness, but Paint Your Wagon had money behind it. It had Lee Marvin and Clint Eastwood. It had a lush soundtrack and grand frontier sets. And yet it collapsed under the weight of one catastrophic casting decision, choosing two actors who could not sing to lead a film filled with songs. Eastwood and Marvin were icons of grit and gunsmoke. Their names drew crowds, but this film needed trained vocalists. Marvin's gravelly croak wandered off-key in every number. Eastwood's soft-spoken delivery lacked power or rhythm. Instead of elevating the musical numbers, their performances turned them into cringe-worthy moments. The story was already odd, a gold mining town run by drunken men buying wives and singing about polygamy. It might have survived with strong vocals and energy. Instead, it felt like a satire that didn't know it was satire. Audiences laughed in the wrong places. Critics were bewildered. The final film ran over 2.5 hours, bloated with awkward musical interludes and dragged pacing. The production budget spiraled due to remote mountain locations and rewrites. By the time it hit theaters, it needed a massive haul to break even. It fell short. The film became a cautionary tale, and Eastwood himself would later mock his own performance. Paint Your Wagon didn't fail because audiences hated musicals. It failed because someone believed two macho cowboys could carry a Broadway score. That one decision left it broken beyond repair. Number 5. Ishtar, 1987. In theory, it should have worked. Dustin Hoffman, Warren Beatty, an Oscar-winning director, a comedic adventure across the Middle East with echoes of Hope and Crosby. But Ishtar became a punchline because of one fateful error: the decision to greenlight a $90 million comedy without a finished script or a clear tone. Elaine May had proven brilliance as a writer, but during Ishtar's production, she struggled to lock down the story. The tone kept shifting. Was it a satire, a buddy comedy, a political farce? Nobody could agree. Meanwhile, the location shoot in Morocco turned into a logistical nightmare. Sandstorms halted filming. Crew walked off. Tensions rose between Beatty and Hoffman. May refused to compromise her vision, but didn't have the pages to back it up. Studio heads panicked as costs ballooned. The actors tried to remain loyal, but even they sensed the storm coming. By the time the film was ready, it had become infamous. Mocked before a single screening. Critics smelled blood. The press called it the next Heaven's Gate. And when it hit theaters, audiences stayed away in droves. But strip away the production drama and the film itself isn't terrible. It has moments of wit and weird charm. But none of that mattered. The legend had already been written, and the fatal decision to proceed without a locked script and a grounded tone buried it under expectations it could never meet. Ishtar became shorthand for vanity projects gone wrong, all because of one choice: to start rolling cameras before the story was truly ready. Number 4. Dr. Doolittle, 1967. By the late 1960s, Hollywood was desperate to replicate the success of My Fair Lady and The Sound of Music. Musicals were still printing money, or so they thought. Enter Dr. Doolittle, a bloated talking animal fantasy with extravagant sets, exotic locations, and one single catastrophic decision: ignoring red flags and going forward with a musical trend that was already dying. The studio banked on Rex Harrison's charisma to carry the film, but Harrison clashed with the crew and co-stars, refused to sing live takes, and demanded changes to the score. The shoot in the Caribbean and UK devolved into chaos. Animals ran wild, sets were delayed, weather shut down production. Harrison stormed off more than once. Despite everything, the studio pushed forward. They poured over $17 million into it, a staggering sum at the time. Test audiences were confused. The pacing dragged. The songs lacked catchiness. But the studio kept spending, even launching an expensive Oscar campaign to salvage prestige. It didn't work. Critics called it bloated and lifeless. It bombed at the box office and marked the beginning of the end for the big-budget musical era. What should have been a charming children's fantasy became a financial black hole. The real tragedy? The source material had potential, but the studio's refusal to adapt to changing audience tastes, to recognize that the musical bubble was about to burst, led to a slow-motion collapse, one miscalculation, one trend-chasing gamble, one flop that nearly bankrupted a studio. Number 3. The Magnificent Ambersons, 1942. Orson Welles had just delivered Citizen Kane. He was untouchable. Studios handed him full creative freedom for his second film, The Magnificent Ambersons. But one brutal decision destroyed everything. RKO Pictures recut the film behind his back and butchered the ending, forever ruining a potential American masterpiece. Wells envisioned Ambersons as a melancholy meditation on fading aristocracy and industrial change. The film was subtle, tragic, and visually stunning. But after poor test screenings, RKO panicked. Wells was overseas in Brazil working on a government-sponsored documentary and couldn't defend the film in person. That's when the studio made its move. RKO executives slashed over 40 minutes of footage, added a clumsy voiceover, and reshot a final scene that gave the film a falsely happy ending. Wells's request to at least see a cut was ignored. The original reels were destroyed, lost forever. What audiences saw was a pale shadow of Wells's vision. The narrative felt rushed. The emotional impact was weakened. Critics noted brilliance, but also sensed something was missing. Wells was devastated. The film flopped commercially and never got a second chance. To this day, The Magnificent Ambersons is held up as the great what-if of American cinema. Had RKO trusted Wells's instincts and waited to collaborate rather than mutilate, it might have become one of the all-time classics. But one decision, to override the artist in the name of marketability, turned art into ashes. Number 2. Cleopatra, 1963. It was supposed to be the most lavish epic of all time. Elizabeth Taylor as Cleopatra, Richard Burton as Mark Antony. A film so extravagant it would define Hollywood excess. But the single fatal decision that wrecked Cleopatra was this: refusing to shut down production when early signs screamed disaster. The moment Taylor fell ill and production had to halt in London, Fox should have regrouped. Instead, they moved the entire shoot to Rome, rebuilt sets from scratch, and recast major roles. Millions had already been spent, but instead of cutting losses, executives chose to double down. The shoot became legendary for its chaos. Taylor's health crises delayed filming. The affair between her and Burton became front-page scandal. Directors were fired, scripts rewritten daily. By the time Cleopatra wrapped, it had cost a staggering $31 million, the most expensive movie ever made at the time. While it eventually recouped its budget due to international grosses, the initial fallout was catastrophic. Fox nearly collapsed. Other projects were shelved, and the idea of the unstoppable Hollywood epic was permanently tarnished. Ironically, the film isn't bad. It won 4 Oscars and features stunning design. But its legacy is one of waste. All because one studio refused to say the word stop. That refusal, that fear of admitting failure, turned Cleopatra into a monument of ruin. Number 1. Heaven's Gate, 1980. No other movie symbolizes cinematic self-destruction quite like Heaven's Gate. Michael Cimino had just won Oscars for The Deer Hunter. United Artists gave him complete freedom. And his one decision, to demand total control with no budget cap, detonated the studio's future. Cimino micromanaged every detail. He reshot entire scenes to perfect dust levels and horse placement. He built entire Wyoming towns from scratch. Extras had to attend roller skating classes for background shots. The script ballooned. The shoot dragged on for months. From a planned $11 million budget, costs exploded past $40 million. United Artists, desperate to protect its prestige, let it happen. No one said no, and when Heaven's Gate finally premiered, a 3-hour-plus, slow-burn frontier tragedy, critics and audiences alike rejected it. The reviews were brutal. The pacing was glacial. The tone was joyless. United Artists pulled the film, re-edited it, and re-released it to little effect. The damage was done. The film earned less than $4 million. The studio collapsed. Heaven's Gate became the benchmark for ego-driven flops. Yet decades later, critics have reappraised it as a misunderstood masterpiece. But at the time, all anyone saw was a studio destroyed by a single act of creative indulgence. One unchecked decision turned freedom into fire. A single decision can make or break a film. These weren't just bombs, they were warnings carved into celluloid. Vision needs limits, ambition needs shape. And sometimes the cost of one wrong call is cinematic immortality. For all the wrong reasons. Like and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes mayhem.